Everyone knows Dracula. The pale face, the castle, the blood, the monster that comes out after dark. But forget the vampire. Because centuries before Dracula became a creature of fiction, there was a real ruler whose name terrified his enemies across Eastern Europe. His name was Vlad, and he did not need fangs to make people afraid. He ruled through fear, fought an empire far more powerful than his own, and became infamous for a punishment so brutal that history attached it permanently to his name, Vlad the Impaler. But here is where the story becomes disturbing. Some of the darkest stories told about Vlad came from his enemies. So was he truly the monster history remembers? Or did war, propaganda, and centuries of legend transform a ruthless prince into Dracula? Because the real man behind the name may be far more complicated and far darker than the vampire everyone knows. Vlad was born around 1431 into a world where rulers rarely survived by being gentle. His homeland, Wallachia, sat between powerful rivals. Hungary and the Christian states of Central Europe lay to the north and west. Across the Danube, the Ottoman Empire was expanding. Wallachia was small, but its location made it important. Vlad's father, Vlad II, was ruler of Wallachia and a member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian chivalric order associated with resistance to the Ottoman advance. From that connection came a name. Dracula, and Vlad, his son, became known as Dracula, son of Dracula. But before Dracula became a legend, it belonged to a boy trapped inside one of the most dangerous struggles in Europe. In 1442, Vlad's father entered negotiations with the Ottoman Sultan Murad II. The meeting ended with a brutal form of political insurance. Vlad and his younger brother Radu were left in Ottoman hands as hostages. They were still children. Their lives now depended on their father's obedience. The boys were educated and kept under Ottoman control, learning court behavior, warfare, and the realities of imperial power. The experience shaped them differently. Radu developed close ties to the Ottoman world. Vlad did not. Captivity taught Vlad a brutal lesson. Power belonged to whoever could make another man obey. In 1447, Vlad's father was killed during a violent struggle for the Wallachian throne. His older brother Mircea was also killed. The family Vlad expected to return to had been shattered. His father was dead. His brother was dead. And the throne that should have belonged to his family had passed into other hands. For the rest of his life, Vlad would fight to take it back. Wallachia had no peaceful line of succession. Princes rose through alliances, noble support, foreign armies, and sometimes assassination. Vlad learned this immediately. In 1448, with Ottoman support, he briefly seized the Wallachian throne. It lasted only a short time. His rival returned. Vlad fled. For years he moved through shifting alliances as Hungary, the Ottomans, and rival Wallachian factions fought for influence. Then, in 1456, he returned. This time, Vlad took the throne and held it. Now he faced a problem every unstable ruler faces. The men powerful enough to help put a prince on the throne were also powerful enough to remove him. Wallachia's boyars, the great noble families, had their own loyalties, rivalries, and ambitions. Vlad had already seen what political betrayal could do to a ruling family. He had no intention of becoming its next victim. So, he began consolidating power with extraordinary brutality. Later stories accused him of inviting nobles to feasts, arresting some, killing others, and forcing survivors into labor. The details differ, but the pattern is clear. Vlad wanted fear to do what trust could not. He punished enemies publicly. He attacked rivals without hesitation. And one method became inseparable from his name. Impalement, the victim was placed on a sharpened stake and raised above the ground, sometimes left to die slowly in full view of others. Vlad did not invent the punishment, but he used it so deliberately as a message that enemies began calling him Epée, the Impaler. Public terror was political communication. A body on a stake told every noble, thief, soldier, merchant, and for an envoy the same thing: disobedience has a price. and Vlad wanted that price to be unforgettable. Stories about Vlad's punishments multiplied. Some described thieves being executed. Others told of dishonest merchants, disloyal nobles, enemy soldiers, and people who violated his orders suffering horrifying deaths. One tradition claimed Vlad left a golden cup beside a public fountain because no one dared steal it. Another portrayed him dining while victims died around him. But these stories present a problem. Vlad lived at exactly the moment when sensational stories could travel farther and faster than before. German-language accounts and later printed pamphlets portrayed him as a sadistic monster. Woodcuts showed him eating among forests of impaled bodies. The stories were horrifying. They were also politically useful. Vlad had fought with Saxon merchants in towns in Transylvania. He had made enemies among powerful groups with access to the networks through which these accounts spread. That does not mean the violence was invented. Vlad really did use impalement and rule brutally. But victim numbers grew enormous, and many grotesque stories are difficult or impossible to verify. The real Vlad was violent enough without every legend being true, and soon he would turn that violence toward an enemy far larger than Wallachia itself. The Ottoman Empire. By the late 1450s, the Ottomans were the rising superpower of southeastern Europe. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II had conquered Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire. The city that had resisted Muslim armies for centuries had fallen. To Christian Europe, the message was terrifying. Mehmed was not finished. Wallachia had traditionally paid tribute to the Ottomans. Vlad eventually stopped. This was a challenge. A small prince north of the Danube was telling one of the world's most powerful rulers that he would no longer submit. For Vlad, the coming war would decide more than territory. It would decide whether Wallachia remained under his control at all. Vlad moved first. During the winter of 1461 into 1462, his forces crossed the Danube and attacked Ottoman-controlled settlements. He reported killing large numbers of enemies. Then Mehmed II responded. The Sultan gathered a major invasion force and marched toward Wallachia. The imbalance was enormous. Vlad could not defeat the Ottoman army in open battle, so he tried to make Wallachia itself hostile to the invaders. Supplies were removed. Settlements were abandoned. Resources were destroyed. The Ottomans advanced into a country that offered them less and less to use. Vlad harassed them instead of meeting them on equal terms. Then came the moment that would become one of the most famous episodes of his life. The night attack. In June 1462, Vlad led a surprise assault against the Ottoman camp. His goal was breathtakingly ambitious. Kill Sultan Mehmed II. If the Sultan died, the invasion might collapse with him. Under darkness, Wallachian troops entered the Ottoman camp and created chaos. Men fought by torchlight as Vlad's forces searched for the Sultan. But Mehmed survived. The assassination attempt failed. Vlad could hurt the Ottoman army. He could terrify it, but he could not destroy it. And as Mehmed pushed deeper into Wallachia, the invaders encountered the image that would define Vlad's reputation for centuries. Near Trigovite, accounts describe a vast display of impaled bodies. Ottoman prisoners had been raised on stakes in a deliberate landscape of terror. Later writers called it a forest of the impaled. The exact number remains disputed, but the purpose is impossible to miss. Vlad wanted the Sultan's army to see what awaited those who entered his land. It was psychological warfare written in human bodies. Even for a century accustomed to brutal punishment, the spectacle became legendary. But fear could only take Vlad so far. Mehmed had another weapon, Vlad's younger brother. Radu, the same brother who had spent his youth with Vlad in Ottoman custody, now stood on the opposite side. Backed by Ottoman power, Radu offered Wallachian nobles an alternative ruler. And slowly, Vlad's political support began to collapse. Vlad had built authority through fear. But fear does not always create loyalty. When a stronger enemy appeared, many had reasons to choose someone else. By the end of 1462, Vlad had lost control of Wallachia. The prince who had terrified the Ottoman frontier was now running for help. Vlad turned toward Hungary and King Matthias Corvinus. He expected support. Instead, he was arrested. The exact reasoning remains debated, but the result was extraordinary. A prince celebrated for resisting the Ottomans became a prisoner of a Christian king. Vlad spent years under Hungarian control, and while he was confined, another version of him was escaping into the world. Not Vlad the prince, Vlad the monster. Stories of his cruelty circulated through Central Europe. The printing press helped later versions travel to new audiences. Readers encountered a ruler who impaled thousands, mutilated enemies, punished minor offenses with death, and calmly ate among corpses. For people who would never see Wallachia, these stories became Vlad. Political context disappeared. What remained was violence, a name, Dracula, and an image people could not forget. Eventually, Vlad returned to political life. By the 1470s, circumstances had changed again. His brother Radu was dead. Ottoman influence in Wallachia remained contested. Vlad regained support, and in 1476 returned once more to the throne. It was his third reign. It would also be his last. Within months, Vlad was dead. The precise circumstances remain uncertain. He appears to have been killed fighting Ottoman forces or their allies near the end of 1476. Some accounts claimed his head was sent to Sultan Mehmed as proof that his old enemy was gone. His burial place is disputed. The details of his final battle are disputed. The number of people he killed is disputed. But the reputation survived. And centuries later, a writer who had never met Vlad and was not writing a biography would give that reputation an afterlife no medieval prince could have imagined. In 1897, Irish writer Bram Stoker published Dracula. His Count Dracula was an aristocratic vampire from Transylvania. He lived in a castle, he drank blood, he could become a supernatural predator, and popular culture would eventually turn him into perhaps the most famous vampire in history. It is tempting to imagine Stoker simply transformed Vlad's life into a horror novel. The truth is less direct. Stoker encountered the name Dracula while researching the region, and appears to have been attracted to its dark associations. His surviving notes do not show that he built Count Dracula as a detailed portrait of Vlad III. The historical prince and fictional vampire share a name, but evidence for detailed biographical borrowing is weak. Vlad was not a vampire. There is no historical reason to think he drank blood. He did not possess supernatural powers. But history gave fiction something even more useful than facts. It gave it a name already surrounded by fear. The fictional Dracula is frightening because he cannot die. The historical Vlad is frightening because he was human. Every punishment attributed to the real prince belongs not to a supernatural monster, but to the violent political world of the 15th century. And that raises the hardest question in his story. Was Vlad exceptionally cruel even by the standards of his age? Or has centuries of hostile storytelling made him appear uniquely monstrous? The answer lies somewhere between hero and demon. In parts of Romanian historical memory, Vlad became a defender of Wallachia and a symbol of resistance to Ottoman expansion. To his enemies, he was a butcher. To German pamphleteers, he became material for tales of almost unbelievable cruelty. To later popular culture, he became attached to a vampire. None tells the whole story. Calling every accusation propaganda would be a mistake. The evidence for Vlad's brutality is too strong. Impalement was central enough to his reputation that both European and Ottoman traditions remembered it. He used terror, deliberately. He killed political enemies. He punished opposition savagely. But accepting every medieval number and every grotesque anecdote as literal fact would be another mistake. Modern historical work continues to question the enormous victim totals passed down through hostile accounts. The monster grew in the telling. There was a real man at the center of the legend, a prince born into political violence, a child hostage of an empire, a ruler who lost his family, fought for a throne, used terror to hold it. challenged Mehmed the Conqueror, lost everything, returned, and died fighting for power again. That life was already extraordinary. It did not need vampires. It did not need supernatural darkness. It did not even need every story told about him to be true. Because Vlad understood something long before modern propaganda, mass media, or horror cinema existed, fear can outlive the person who creates it. Vlad's reigns were short. His state was small. His victories were temporary. Yet his name traveled farther than the names of countless rulers who controlled larger armies and richer kingdoms. Not because he conquered the world, because the world remembered the story. More than 4 centuries after his death, Bram Stoker gave that old name to a fictional monster. The vampire became immortal, and in the process, so did Vlad. Today, when most people hear the word Dracula, they imagine fangs, blood, a black cape, and a castle under moonlight. But behind all of it stands a 15th century prince who never rose from a coffin. He never transformed into a bat. He never needed the supernatural. He had something far more real. A throne surrounded by enemies, a talent for turning violence into a message, and a reputation so powerful that history could never completely separate the ruler from the monster. Dracula was not real, but Vlad Dracula was, and perhaps that is why his story has survived. The vampire belongs to fiction. The fear began with a man,